First tonight, after many years of bad governance, there appears to be a growing shift in ideology in this country, with many Nigerians sending a signal that they'll no longer roll over silently and that they want to fight for their freedoms and their rights. The question is, will they be successful in doing that? And what will be sacrificed to achieve the stand that they're taking? Do they have the capability of making great change in this country? Well, one man who has consistently tried to step in to help Nigerians take their first steps into a new Nigeria is the former president of the Nigerian Bar Association and founder of one of the country's foremost human rights groups, the Civil Liberties Organization, or CLO, Dr Olisa Agbakoba, who is also, of course, a senior advocate of Nigeria. And today, with the presidential election less than 3 months away, he took another step in that direction by launching an all-embracing policy report addressing big issues like insecurity, the economy, and national unity, hoping to get the attention of the presidential candidates against the backdrop of the increasing fragility of the Nigerian state. Well, for more on that policy report, I'm joined now on the line from Lagos by the former president of the Nigerian Bar Association and noted human rights and constitutional lawyer, Dr Olisa Agbakoba, senior advocate of Nigeria. Olisa, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I know you've had a ferociously busy and long day, so thank you for taking the time to come in. First of all, tell us why you felt the need to hold this webinar today. What's the idea behind it?
Well, the idea was to assist Nigerians determine how to vote. Simple as that. And also to interrogate the various candidates' manifestos and issues, and to see what I could add, help. And I'm not suggesting in any way that I possess any wisdom, but I just thought it would be good for somebody to interlocute. So when I read all the manifestos, I thought it was necessary to narrow some of the big issues, such as the question of political restructure, economic revival, and the big issue of 133 million Nigerians living in abject poverty. And so when I looked at their manifestos, I felt it was good. I mean, this is the first time really we're having a discussion around issues unlike past elections. So my agenda is simply to assist both sides, both the presidential candidates and the people who seek to vote, to say, well, here are the things you ought to look out for in order to make up your mind who to vote for. So just a simple patriotic duty on my part that I felt called upon to do.
Well, I think you're being very humble there, because I mean you have a history of trying to put this country on the right path of rectitude, and I think most Nigerians recognize that. But you talked about looking at the manifestos and trying to distill them into something that's bite-sized, that the populace can at large can sort of get their heads around. One of the issues, because I caught your webinar, a little bit of it this morning, at the beginning and towards the end, one of the issues you raised is the fact that the frontline presidential candidates, presumably having looked at their manifestos, are not looking at technology as a means of dealing with insecurity. Their manifestos, according to you, don't seem to look at the use of, for instance, Nigeria's satellites in dealing with insecurity. Can you expand a bit more on that?
Well, there are modern ways to fight insecurity. So when I looked at all the manifestos, I was sort of surprised that we have the Nigerian Space Agency, which I happen to be legal advisors to, and NICECOMSAT. Between these two agencies of government, they have the capability of having their footprints, their satellite footprints around Nigeria. And so if the challenge has been that the forest in northeast Nigeria is a problem, this is something that satellite technology can do in a minute. So I'm surprised that in all the discussions, both in terms of what goes on today and in the manifestos, no one mentions this satellite technology. And that, for me, was a missing gap. So again, as I said, my own small responsibility or duty is to throw up issues which I hope will enable the presidential candidates to say, maybe we need to look at some of the things that Olisa is saying and take it on board. So I think any Nigerian president who comes in next year will confront a couple of big issues and would need to unify the country, would need to resolve the issue of the fightings across Nigeria, IPOP in the southeast and Boko Haram in the northeast. But to do that, he would need technology. But that aside, he would also need to have the important engagement with what I call the sub-ethnic nationalities. Because these are the guys who, before 1914, were actually the owners of Nigeria. And I think before now, they've been actually excluded in the discussions of how we shall redefine Nigeria's political arrangements. So anyone who wishes to be Nigeria's president ought to be looking at what Afenifere is saying, what Ohaneze is saying, and these other groups. Because what we want is a Nigerian president who can come in and say, I will do this, but to get to the real big issues, I need a peaceful country. I need to resolve Nigeria's challenges. I need to include everybody. I need to deal with the question of marginalization. Once I resolve all this, I can move forward. So when I interrogated the manifestos, I thought that they were good, but there were certain gaps that I hope that what I'm doing today and what I did in the morning and what I'll continue to do will assist both the voters and the people looking for office to say, yeah, we need to do something new to make Nigerian voters informed. So that's my simple task.
Right. While I let you sort of put your other earpiece back in, because I need to be sure that you can hear me and that there isn't an issue with hearing, because obviously communication absolutely essential. You made a very good point about unity being vital to the progress of this country and to solving Nigeria's multi-dimensional problems. You talked a little bit about that now and bringing everyone on board. Absolutely essential. I think most people would agree with that. But the other big issue that you raised was, and you talked about it at the outset tonight, was about poverty reduction and how you see that. Because I know you've consistently spoken about how impossibly difficult it would be for the federal government to be in Abuja and to eliminate poverty in the nooks and crannies of this country. And your point is that the local government tier of administration must be revived as a means of reaching the grassroots in this country. That seems like a perfectly reasonable and logical approach. Is that something you've seen in the manifestos of the candidates being discussed?
Absolutely silent on that. Absolutely silent on all the manifestos, and that's a missing gap. So what I think is when the candidates engage with the people and they will say to them, we need peace, we need unity, so that's the first challenge. Then they'll also say, what political arrangements are we looking at? And this is where the difficult question of restructuring comes in. But I tend to like to use a neutral word called rebalancing or devolution of powers. And I see this occurring at two levels. First, the federal government cannot continue to exercise the 98 items of power in the Constitution. There must be some agreement. And here is what I'd like to say. A new Nigerian president in 2023 will not be imperial. He must be functional. He must be prepared to age like Obama did. He must be prepared to grasp and take things, by his control and get things done. So the first thing I think our president needs to do, and then we have to look at the manifestos to see who is prepared to do that, is to say we can't get a good Nigeria if we exclude two important areas of the country, 200 million people. On the northern fringes, we have about 75 million. On the southern maritime communities, we have about 100 million. That's 175 million. Nobody is talking to these people. We sit in Abuja, or you guys sit in Abuja, not me, I'm in Lagos, sit in Abuja at the National Assembly and at Aso Rock and pass legislation or policies or executive orders that are highly urbanized. The Nigerian political space has been dominated by what I'd like to call urban economies. We need to include these people on the fringes, to bring them in, because they're important in the discussion. And if you also do that, it addresses the question you earlier raised about multidimensional poverty. We have almost 17% of Nigerians out of the system. The only way you can bring them in is to bring them into the discussion of how do you want to see a new political arrangement. When you resolve that, and by the way, this is largely missing in the manifestos. When you've discussed that, then you can go on to tackle the bigger issue of, now we've had a discussion on national unity, stability, governance, peace and good order. We can then talk about what type of economic policy do we wish to see. Economic policy has 5 subsets. It's got the soft, it's got the hard, it's got the part that deals with the soft issues around law and order. The hard economy deals with infrastructure. But unless a candidate, and I didn't see this addressed in any of the manifestos, understands the linkage between all these 5 subsets, then we will make progress. Because right now, what Nigeria does is essentially to have a urban-driven economy, which is why you have a lot of rural-urban migration. So people living in the rural areas feel excluded. So you find Lagos bombarded by 6, 7, 8 million people from across Nigeria. So a president must present a manifesto which appeals to people on the fringes, either in northern Nigeria or on the south coastal regions. They can identify with what the president is saying. So my challenge, sort of, was to say, I've looked at the manifestos, and I'd like the candidates to take a second look at what they are saying to see if they cannot expand it. 133 million people who are multi-dimensionally poor and excluded from the process can only get in if there's a president who is looking at what interests that they have. If you look at the typical Nigerian budget, the typical Nigerian budget would assign more money to the National Assembly than health and education put together. That doesn't show a government committed to including Nigerians. And the only way we can reverse poverty is by allocating substantial parts of our budget to the marginalized Nigerians. So, in essence, what I'm trying to do is assist the candidates to go back and take a look, say, we've listened to what he's saying, maybe what I'm saying is rubbish, but some may say, well, maybe he's got a point, and if they feel I have a point, then maybe they would like to, rejig their manifestos so that we get the best presidential candidate in 2023. This, I think, is the most important fundamental elections ever, because we have a demographic shift with about 60 million Nigerians who are totally uncommitted to anybody except good governance. So those are the people that I also seek to assist to identify who might be the type of guy, if you supported by your vote, your simple vote, might then come back and say, I shall vote for you because I feel that your manifesto is such that if I voted for you, I will see something that I will benefit from.
Wow, I have to say, I think that's an absolutely extraordinary analysis on your part, and I can imagine the politicians who've been doing business as usual squirming watching you this evening, because they're sitting there thinking, my goodness, this isn't what I bargained for. I bargained for something much easier and you know, sort of the old type of way of doing things. But I think most Nigerians would appreciate the fact that you're setting a very high bar, and it's only high in comparison to what has happened before. It's not really high when it comes to normal good governance in the rest of the civilized world. But given all that, what is your assessment then of the presidential candidates and what you've seen so far of their campaigns?
I will resist the temptation to provide an answer. And the reason is I don't want to sound as if I have a preferred candidate. So in the morning when I did the webinar, I said, I'm doing this because I'm close to 70. I started public policy work at 29. And the only thing I can contribute is to offer a fair assessment without any bias or inducement. And hopefully, Nigerians will see me as a fair person saying what comes from my mind. So I'm not going to say, you know, make any comments about a particular candidate, other than to say the 2023 process has improved on at least issues. So we now see issues more in the space. That's one. Two, hopefully we see INEC closing the gap and trying to deliver credible elections. I just hope that the update of the voters list at the base of our elections will go well electronically, so we can all see that. So I hope that the elections will be free and fair, and that the dominant demographic shift, which shows that 60 million Nigerian youths frustrated, angry at what's gone on, will make an impact. Now, if that will make an impact, then this is the first time likely that votes will count. So that's going to push people to think twice about, if we have a lot of people who will vote on their brains, then we better begin to talk sense. You saw what happened to Liz Truss. She lost the confidence of the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party in turn talked about how they would lose the general elections because people don't want them. So this election might surprise people in the sense of throwing up people power. Votes will count, and if votes will count, then you better be prepared with your campaign manifesto. And for me, the biggest issue would be, what presidential candidate has a clear agenda with the budget and the timelines to reverse multidimensional poverty? That's going to be the issue. None of the presidential candidates actually addressed the issue. In fairness to them, this new multidimensional poverty index came out well before they had written their manifesto, so it's understandable that they did not delve in detail. But part of what I'm doing is to say to them, well, it's true that you wrote your manifestos well before, but now that you know about multidimensional poverty, what exactly will you do? If the I repeat this, if the National Assembly is budgeting more money to itself than health and education, that is a serious indictment. There's no way that we're going to lift 133 million people out of poverty with the current budgetary configuration. So my message is to the candidates, please go and re-examine your manifestos and see what you can do to up it up so that those guys in the age brackets that I refer to will say, yeah, these are the guys, or this is the person, if I voted for, I will have a payback. I'm not going to vote for someone who doesn't give me anything. That's what I would be saying if I was a 21-year-old. People are buying away, the country is empty, brain drain is going on, and the reason for that is bad governance. So this is an opportunity for us to actually reclaim power. This is the first time I've seen such excitement amongst this important demographic people. So I just hope that our politicians are listening. I don't know if you listened to Professor Patrice Lumumba yesterday at the 10th anniversary of the death of Olisa Agbakoba. He said it all. So any politician who was there and listened will get the message. Maybe it's time for people's votes to count.
Yes, we had it live on Arise News, so I saw quite a bit of what he had to say. Very, very important points, but also you're making some very, very important points here, and I do hope that the candidates are listening. But beyond the fact that you don't want to line up behind a particular candidate, which is perfectly understandable, do you see in this crop of presidential candidates a president emerging from their ranks who might fit the kind of president that you'd like to see in 2023?
Yeah. There are a couple, but I'm not going to go into more detail. But clearly, there are a couple of candidates who I think, reading their manifestos and looking at their background and their general disposition, do have the potential to deliver on a good Nigeria, which, to summarize, would be resolving Nigeria's political disunity, one, by creating a legitimate constitution, by devolving powers, and by strengthening the local governments. These three. Then, on the economic side, by setting out a clear economic policy and linkaging the 5 subsets of what I think a good economic policy should be, and then going ahead to implement the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda, which is sort of a guide to pull people out of poverty. China did not pull 1 billion people out of poverty just by making statements. China did that by allocating resources, money, to poverty and creating timelines and creating legislation that did that. So this government says we're going to pull 100 billion people out of poverty in 10 years. But there are no timelines, there's no budgetary allocation, so it's just talk. So I would expect the candidate who wishes to be taken serious by this important demographic lot of Nigerians to say to them, I'm going to do A, B, C, D. And they believe him, and they vote for him, and there'll be change. And the other point I think I need to make, a Nigerian president is a very serious occupation. It's not a lazy man's job. When you become Nigerian president, you actually age. You don't grow young, because on your shoulder rests a great responsibility of making the country good. So I'm also looking at what the candidates are saying about their economic policy. They have to have the potential to raise revenue. As you know, Charles, this country is resource challenged in terms of money. But the money is actually available. So I want to see a candidate, and unfortunately, this is not really addressed in the manifestos, how a president can rely on internal revenue resources other than domestic or international borrowing. Right now we're at about 80 trillion naira debts. Our debt to revenue profile is so high that I'm not sure what it is to actually aspire to be Nigerian president. So the manifestos don't excite me from the point of view of the urgency of raising money. Because if you don't have a budget, you can't do anything. But there are ways to do that. All you need to do is to look around. And I was pleasantly surprised that the Minister of Finance just the other day, by a wave of hand, said, oh, you know what? We've got something called the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, MOFI. And we just had a look, and we found out that there is 33 trillion naira that we can tap. Now, if that is true, if the Ministry of Finance draws on 33 trillion naira in the system, then we don't have a problem, because we only have a 7 trillion naira deficit. So what I'm suggesting is candidates must be very aggressive in their thinking to see how they can raise resources. The current process of borrow, I think needs to change.
Okay, that's very, very interesting, I have to say, Olisa. We've got a couple of minutes or so left. I want to get you talked briefly about the members of the public and particularly the youth demographic in this election. I was going to ask you about the public and the need for them to hold their leaders and potential leaders to account. I mean, do you see a shift where the members of the public are sending a signal that they'll no longer roll over silently in the face of bad governance? And if you do, are they likely to be successful in doing that? And what will be sacrificed to achieve the stand that they're taking?
Let's go, I mean, there was the old school, people like us, when we started the Civil Liberties Organization. Then there's the new school, the NSAS movement. What the NSAS movement did, even though it did not achieve its ultimate goal, but it left a lesson, it left a warning that there's a lot of power in organized movements. So the NSAS movement is the mother of the new Nigerian voter. So I hope, and I feel confident that the NSAS movement, it's very amorphous. You can't really define it and say it's here or there, but it's there. It's a big, huge movement. So those are the guys, probably 40 million of them. Those are the guys who I feel can tell our political people, you know what? The story is up. This is a new Nigeria. We're not going to stand for the old rubbish. And in saying this, I'll just make a quick point about political chicanery. And two guys come to mind. One, I actually don't remember his name, so you must excuse me. Maybe you remember his name. It's this guy who is from the north. He's a Christian leader from the north. He was former secretary to the federal government. He's an APC man. He says he's friends with Bola Tinubu, but he won't support Bola Tinubu, but he's in the APC.
Talking about Babachi
and he goes on to support today. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We don't want people like that. We don't want people like that. So he's supporting, today he says it's APC, no sorry, it's PDP, and the next day it's Labour Party. We don't want all that. If you feel dissatisfied with the party you belong to, just move on. The other man that I feel a bit worried about is Wike. I just cannot figure out what he wants. He's a good man. He's done a lot for the PDP. He's done a lot for Rivers State. But you can't be in a party that you disown. It boggles, it beats my imagination that here's a guy who's governor who will leave in the next 3-4 months. but he's causing all sorts of confusion that I just don't know what his agenda is. Now, that is part of the old politics. And I hope that this new demographic voting population I describe will understand the shift between the Wikis and that Christian leader that I don't know his name. These are guys of yesterday. We want guys of principle. If you recall Ronaldo, the footballer, when he made a speech against Manchester United, they said, this is not on. This is not on. You can't do this as a member of the Manchester United football team, so you're out. So, to those who don't want to be in a political party, move away. Why will Wike be in the PDP and tell people in River State that I will tell you who to vote for? Who is he? Why should he say that? I will tell you who to vote for. Oh, please, vote PDP for Rivers governorship, House of Assembly people, but on the presidential. That, for me, is gross misconduct. And that's part of the old school that is taking Nigeria nowhere. And I hope that our new demographic forces will recognize that we don't want people like that. We want new leaders that can take Nigeria forward.
And on that very important advisory note, I want to thank you very much indeed for your wise counsel this evening. Dr. Olisa Agbakoba is the former president of the Nigerian Bar Association, senior advocate of Nigeria, and noted human rights and constitutional lawyer. Thank you very much indeed. And he was talking to me there from Lagos.